The hidden psychology of wealth. Carl Jung never taught you. What if wealth has nothing to do with luck, talent, or inheritance, and everything to do with your unconscious mind? Carl Jung believed that poverty and prosperity both begin in the psyche, that your financial reality is a mirror of your inner world. In this video, we'll explore how hidden archetypes, shadow beliefs, and the process of individuation determine not just how much you earn, but who you become in the process of creating wealth. You're not about to learn how to make money. You're about to learn how to become the kind of person who can't help but attract it. Part 1. The Inner Poverty. Jung's hidden truth about wealth. Carl Jung once said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This idea perfectly captures why so many people struggle financially, even when they work hard, stay disciplined, and do everything right. The problem is not always outside, it's inside. Wealth in Jungian psychology is not merely about money or possessions. It's about psychic energy, the flow of vitality, creativity, and meaning within the human psyche. When that flow is blocked by fear, guilt, or limiting beliefs, we experience inner poverty. And inner poverty always manifests as outer scarcity. 1. The psychological roots of poverty. According to Jung, most people unconsciously sabotage their potential because of deep-seated archetypal conflicts. They may have inherited from their family or culture a narrative that glorifies struggle and condemns wealth as selfish or corrupt. This conditioning becomes part of the shadow, the repressed part of the psyche that contains everything we deny about ourselves. When someone unconsciously associates wealth with greed or moral corruption, they begin to reject that energy within themselves. They say they want abundance, but at a deeper level they're afraid of what it might make them become. So they work tirelessly, yet their results never match their effort. Jung would describe this as a psychic split. The conscious self is chasing success, while the unconscious self is resisting it. This split creates what Jung called psychic tension, the inner war between desire and guilt. The person wants to thrive, but another voice whispers, "You don't deserve it." Until this shadow conflict is brought to light, no amount of strategy or motivation will create real prosperity. 2. Money as a symbol of energy. In Jung's framework, every external object or goal holds symbolic meaning. Money, for instance, represents psychic energy in material form. It's not just paper or numbers, it's the manifestation of one's capacity to create exchange and express value in the world. When a person feels unworthy of receiving or fears losing what they have, it reflects a blocked relationship with their inner energy. They might experience financial ups and downs that mirror their psychological instability. They may attract opportunities but sabotage them unconsciously, missing calls, delaying decisions, or distrusting people who want to help. To Jung, such patterns are not coincidences. They are manifestations of the unconscious psyche communicating through life circumstances. The unconscious doesn't speak in words, it speaks in patterns. If your life constantly shows scarcity, it's not punishment. It's a message that your energy flow toward creation and abundance has been obstructed. When the flow of psychic energy is free, when you feel confident, aligned, and purposeful, you naturally attract and sustain wealth. But when that flow is bound by anxiety, envy, or shame, even large sums of money will slip away, leaving you emotionally and materially depleted. 3. The shadow of success. Most people believe they want to be successful, but in Jungian psychology, desire alone isn't enough. The unconscious must agree with that desire. Many people secretly fear the responsibilities or visibility that come with success. Some fear outshining their family. Others fear being judged, envied, or rejected once they rise. Jung noted that the psyche often resists individuation because it requires us to step outside the collective norm. In other words, to become truly wealthy, you must be willing to differentiate yourself, to stand apart. But our collective conditioning tells us to fit in, to stay humble, to not make others uncomfortable. These inherited fears of exclusion are primal, rooted in our ancestral need for tribe and safety. So we sabotage our progress not because we're lazy, but because our unconscious believes it's protecting us from rejection. Jung would call this an archetypal defense mechanism, a primitive instinct dressed in modern behavior. You might procrastinate, overspend, or avoid opportunities, not realizing these are psychological acts of self-preservation. The psyche says, if you stay small, you stay safe. Yet paradoxically, this attempt to stay safe creates suffering. We feel restless, trapped, resentful, aware that we could be more but unable to move. The path to wealth then begins not with external hustle but with inner confrontation, facing the fear of visibility, the guilt of success, and the shame of wanting more. 4. The archetype of the beggar. Every human psyche carries the beggar archetype. This is the part of us that pleads, please give me enough. It's not about literal begging, it's about dependence, victimhood, and the unconscious belief that someone else controls our fate. Jung believed that this archetype becomes dominant when the individual has not integrated their inner king or queen, the aspect of the psyche that rules one's life with authority and sovereignty. The beggar waits. The king acts. The beggar prays for opportunity. The king creates it. When people remain stuck in the beggar archetype, they often project power onto others, bosses, governments, luck, or the system. They think wealth is something given, not something manifested through inner alignment. But the truth is, as long as you externalize power, you cannot become rich, because the psyche interprets your belief as helplessness, and your outer reality mirrors that helplessness. Integrating the beggar means acknowledging that your past may have been hard, that scarcity shaped your early mindset, but refusing to identify with it anymore. It's about replacing the unconscious phrase, I hope I can, with I decide I will. This inner shift is subtle but revolutionary. Once the beggar transforms into the creator, money stops being a chase, it becomes a reflection of who you are becoming. 5. Unconscious inheritance, family, and cultural beliefs. One of Jung's key insights was that our personal unconscious is deeply influenced by the collective unconscious. This means our relationship with wealth is not purely personal, it's inherited. If you grew up hearing money doesn't grow on trees or rich people are dishonest, your psyche internalized those messages as protective truths. They became part of your family myth, shaping your identity long before you made any conscious financial decision. In many families, loyalty to these myths is unconscious. You might feel guilty for earning more than your parents ever did, as if success betrays your roots. Jung would call this a loyalty to the ancestral complex, a psychological pattern that binds you to family suffering out of love and belonging. To break free from this invisible chain, you must perform what Jung called psychic differentiation. You honor your lineage but refuse to repeat its limitations. You might say, I carry my ancestors' wisdom but not their poverty. This is not arrogance, it's individuation. It's the process of becoming your own conscious being rather than a repetition of inherited trauma. 6. The fear of abundance. Scarcity feels familiar, abundance feels unsafe. This paradox explains why people self-sabotage after success. Sudden wealth can trigger old fears, guilt, and anxiety. Jung would describe this as the return of the repressed. When the unconscious mind has associated having more with danger or moral corruption, it will create crises to bring the person back to their emotional comfort zone. For example, someone might receive a promotion and immediately get sick, lose focus, or enter conflicts. These are not coincidences. They're the psyche's way of restoring equilibrium, even if that equilibrium is miserable. Until a person consciously redefines what abundance means to them, their nervous system will equate more with unsafe. The healing comes when we reframe abundance as a natural state, not a reward for being perfect, but a reflection of alignment with the flow of life. Jung's individuation process is about restoring harmony between the conscious and unconscious. When both agree that prosperity is safe, it arrives and stays. 7. The mirror principle. Wealth reflects inner wholeness. In Jungian psychology, the outer world is a mirror of the inner world. If your financial reality feels chaotic, It often mirrors an inner fragmentation, unresolved conflicts, unhealed wounds, or a lack of clear direction. You can't build external order on internal confusion. That's why so many people fluctuate between abundance and collapse. They are trying to build skyscrapers on unstable psychological ground. The individuation journey demands internal organization, first aligning thoughts, emotions, and actions with an integrated sense of purpose. When the psyche becomes whole, wealth naturally gravitates toward it, because it recognizes structure, meaning, and stability. Wealth, therefore, is not achieved through luck or talent alone, but through psychological coherence. A person who knows who they are, what they value, and how they serve will always magnetize the opportunities and resources aligned with that state of being. 8. Integration, healing the inner split. To truly get rich without luck, one must integrate the parts of the psyche that resist prosperity. This involves deep shadow work, acknowledging resentment toward the wealthy, releasing guilt over wanting more, and confronting the fear of power. Jung would say that every quality you admire or despise in others exists within you. If you despise wealth, you despise your own potential for power. If you envy success, you deny your own ability to create it. Integration begins when you stop judging these impulses and start understanding them. The goal isn't to eliminate ambition or desire, but to align them with consciousness. When you embrace the shadow of greed, it transforms into healthy ambition. When you embrace the shadow of envy, it becomes inspiration. When you embrace the shadow of fear, it becomes focus. Jung's message is clear. Wholeness, not perfection, leads to abundance. The person who integrates both light and dark becomes magnetic. They stop seeking permission to succeed. Their energy communicates certainty, and the universe responds accordingly. 9. The first stage of true wealth. From a Jungian lens, the first step toward external success is inner individuation, becoming aware of who you are beyond conditioning. You can't build wealth if you're living by someone else's script. When you realize that your beliefs about money, worth, and effort were never truly yours, you begin to reclaim authorship over your life story. At this stage, the focus shifts from "how can I make money" to "how can I align with the energy that naturally creates value?" Money becomes a byproduct of authenticity. Jung believed that when a person lives in alignment with their self, the totality of the psyche, they begin to radiate energy that attracts synchronicity, the right people, ideas, and timing. This is how people become rich without luck. It's not that luck disappears, it's that what others call luck is simply the visible expression of inner alignment. In Jungian psychology, true wealth begins the moment you transform from a divided being into an integrated one. Before the outer world gives you abundance, the inner world must first believe it deserves, it feels safe with it, and knows how to hold it. That's the hidden foundation of getting rich without luck, talent, or a trust fund, the transformation of consciousness itself. Part 2. Archetypes of wealth: the creator, the warrior, and the sage. In Jungian depth psychology, the path to material and spiritual wealth is shaped by the activation and integration of certain archetypes, universal patterns of energy that live within the collective unconscious. While most people chase success externally through strategy, hard work, or chance, Jung would argue that prosperity first emerges when the psyche aligns with its internal forces. Wealth is not just earned, it's expressed through the interplay of archetypes that channel energy into form. Among these three stand out as essential the creator, the warrior, and the sage. 1. The creator manifestation. Through imagination and vision, the creator archetype represents humanity's innate capacity to bring something new into existence. It is the psychological force of inspiration, innovation, and the deep desire to transform thought into tangible reality. Jung saw creativity not merely as an artistic skill, but as a divine impulse that connects the human psyche to the self, the center of the total personality. From a psychological standpoint, the creator is the opposite of passivity. It moves the individual from victimhood to authorship. Those dominated by unconscious conditioning often wait for life to happen to them. But when the creator archetype awakens, a person begins to realize that their inner images shape their outer world. The creator understands that wealth is not found, but made through disciplined imagination and emotional resonance. In modern society, this archetype manifests in entrepreneurs, inventors, artists, and thinkers, people who see opportunities where others see problems. Yet Jung would say that the creator energy exists in everyone. It is the inner alchemist that turns ideas into gold. But to access it, the psyche must transcend fear of failure and perfectionism. The creator thrives in uncertainty. Its motto is, "I will make something meaningful even from chaos." Psychologically, many suppress their creator energy because they equate imagination with fantasy. They've been told to be realistic. Jung would call this repression a loss of libido, vital psychic energy redirected into anxiety or overthinking. When imagination is repressed, energy stagnates. When expressed, it multiplies. Every act of genuine creation, whether in business, relationships, or art, replenishes the psyche with energy. Wealth then becomes the natural consequence of aligned creative flow, not a forced pursuit. Another aspect of the creator archetype involves the reconciliation of opposites. True creation requires integrating the conscious and the unconscious, the rational and the intuitive. Jung called this process transcendent function, the psychological mechanism through which new possibilities emerge when conflicting inner forces are brought into dialogue. A wealthy mind is one that can hold tension without breaking, allowing something entirely new to be born from it. The danger of the unbalanced creator, however, lies in inflation. When people over-identify with their creative power, they may fall into grandiosity or obsession. Jung warned that if the ego claims ownership over the creative process, it risks losing its grounding in reality. Wealth in this case turns into vanity or self-destruction. The mature creator understands humility, that ideas flow through them, not from them. True abundance requires surrender to the creative current, not control over it. 2. The warrior discipline, boundaries and the courage to act. If the creator brings vision, the warrior brings movement. The warrior archetype channels willpower, discipline, and endurance. Jung viewed the warrior as essential for individuation because it protects the emerging self from regression into weakness or passivity. Without this archetype, creative potential never materializes, ideas remain fantasies. Wealth requires not only imagination but execution, and the warrior embodies that bridge between thought and manifestation. The warrior's psychological essence is clarity and focus. It asks, what must I protect and what must I confront? In the pursuit of success, the warrior cuts through distractions, excuses, and fears. In Jungian terms, this is the process of ego, strengthening the development of a stable center of consciousness, capable of directing psychic energy toward a goal. Yet in the modern world, the warrior energy is often distorted. Some people suppress it, fearing aggression or competition. Others overuse it, becoming ruthless or consumed by control. Jung believed that both extremes indicate imbalance. A conscious warrior operates with integrity and purpose, defending values rather than ego desires. It is not about dominance but alignment, fighting for what truly matters. The path to wealth often demands confrontation with one's own laziness, self-doubt, and comfort addiction. The warrior within is the part of the psyche that says, do it anyway. Jung might interpret procrastination as the ego's avoidance of the unconscious demand for transformation. Every time we resist discomfort, we deny an initiation into greater strength. The warrior archetype thrives in discomfort. It understands that every challenge refines the soul. The warrior also establishes boundaries, a key aspect of psychological wealth. People who lack inner boundaries often give their energy, time, and ideas away without reciprocity. They feel drained, resentful, and confused. Jung taught that individuation requires separation from collective expectations, knowing where I end and they begin. Financially, this translates to knowing your worth, charging your value, and saying no when something doesn't serve your integrity. A person with strong boundaries naturally commands respect and over time wealth. The danger of the unbalanced warrior lies in obsession with conquest. When disconnected from the heart, the warrior becomes the tyrant driven by domination rather than purpose. Jung would describe this as identification with the shadow aspect of Mars, the archetype of power without consciousness. The mature warrior fights not for egoic victory but for meaningful creation serving the Creator's vision and the sage's wisdom. It acts decisively yet remains anchored in awareness. 3. The sage, conscious awareness, and the integration of wisdom. The third archetype, the sage, is the observer, the part of the psyche that sees patterns, learns from experience, and transforms knowledge into insight. Jung believed that wisdom arises when consciousness expands beyond the personal ego into relationship with the self, the inner guide, or God image in the psyche. The sage archetype connects the individual to timeless intelligence, revealing the psychological laws that govern prosperity and loss. In the context of wealth, the sage understands that money is neutral. It is energy shaped by intention. It teaches detachment to neither worship nor fear wealth. While the creator builds and the warrior defends, the sage reflects. It ensures that actions remain ethical, balanced, and aligned with higher purpose. Jung called this holding the opposites, maintaining awareness of both the material and the spiritual dimensions of life. Without the sage, the individual becomes reactive, driven by emotion, impulse, or greed. The sage brings stillness, the ability to pause before acting and to question, why am I creating this? What is the deeper meaning? In Jungian terms, this is the integration of the transcendent function, the psyche's capacity to synthesize rational and irrational forces into higher-order consciousness. The sage archetype also governs timing and patience, two psychological pillars of sustainable wealth. Modern culture glorifies speed and instant results, but Jung's wisdom reminds us that true individuation, and by extension, true success, unfolds organically. Just as the psyche requires time to integrate new insights, material growth follows its own rhythm. The sage trusts this rhythm. It doesn't chase, it aligns. On a practical level, the sage energy manifests as emotional intelligence, discernment, and strategic decision-making. A person in touch with their sage archetype doesn't fall for illusions of easy money or external validation. They know that external fortune without internal wisdom leads to emptiness. The sage sees wealth as a mirror, not an identity. However, an unbalanced sage can become paralyzed by overanalysis. Jung warned that excessive reflection without action leads to neurosis, an inward loop where thought replaces experience. The mature sage maintains equilibrium between reflection and movement, supporting the creator's innovation and the warrior's courage. Its strength lies not in detachment from life, but in full conscious participation with awareness. 4. The dynamic interplay of the three archetypes. In Jung's system, no archetype operates in isolation. Real transformation occurs through their interaction. The creator imagines, the warrior acts, the sage integrates. When these three forces are harmonized, the psyche generates a powerful current of directed energy that materializes as success, stability, and inner fulfillment. If one archetype dominates, imbalance results. For instance, a person ruled by the creator without the warrior becomes a dreamer, rich in ideas but poor in execution. A person dominated by the warrior without the sage becomes a conqueror, wealthy perhaps, but spiritually bankrupt. A person guided only by the sage becomes detached, wise, but inactive, unable to convert insight into tangible form. True prosperity arises when these archetypes dance together in balance. Jung's individuation process can be seen as the art of orchestrating this inner symphony where each archetype serves its rightful function. The creator provides direction, the warrior provides momentum, and the sage provides meaning. The wealth that emerges from this inner harmony is not fragile or dependent on external validation. It is rooted in psychological wholeness. Such an individual doesn't chase luck because they generate it. They don't rely on talent because they channel something deeper, the self, the totality of their conscious and unconscious being. 5. Psychological alchemy, transforming energy into value. Jung frequently compared psychological transformation to alchemy, the ancient art of turning base metals into gold. In this symbolic sense, gold represents consciousness, integration, and value creation. When the creator, warrior, and sage collaborate, the psyche performs a kind of alchemy, transforming raw emotion, fear, and desire into purposeful energy. The creator imagines the gold, the warrior refines it through action, and the sage recognizes its purity. This process mirrors the alchemical stages of nigredo, darkness and chaos, albedo, illumination and purification, and rubedo, integration and manifestation. Wealth, therefore, is not an event but an ongoing transformation of inner substance into external value. People who seem to get rich easily are often unconsciously aligned with this process. They are psychologically integrated even if they can't articulate it in Jungian terms. Those who struggle are often fragmented with their archetypal energies working against each other. The key is not to mimic others' methods, but to align one's inner archetypes toward a unified vision. 6. The shadow side of each archetype. Every archetype carries a shadow, a distorted form that emerges when its energy is repressed or exaggerated. The shadow creator becomes the destroyer, using creativity for manipulation or chaos. This person may innovate, destructively exploit others, or abandon projects when perfection isn't achieved. The shadow warrior becomes the tyrant, dominated by control, competition, or aggression. They win battles but lose peace of mind. The shadow sage becomes the cynic, detached from emotion, hiding behind intellect, dismissing passion as irrational. Integration involves confronting these shadows consciously. Jung would advise active imagination, journaling, or symbolic dialogue to bring awareness to these hidden forces. The more these shadows are acknowledged, the more energy returns to consciousness, fueling authentic success. Without shadow work, wealth amplifies pathology. It magnifies whatever is unhealed. Individuation as the true source of prosperity. The activation of the creator, warrior, and sage is not a self-help formula. It is part of Jung's greater process of individuation, the journey towards psychological wholeness. Individuation is not about becoming perfect, but becoming real. When individuals express their true potential without repression or inflation, they naturally attract prosperity that reflects their authenticity. A person who has individuated no longer sees wealth as proof of worth, but as a byproduct of inner coherence. Jung believed that the self, once integrated, arranges external life circumstances in alignment with inner truth. This is not superstition, but synchronicity, the meaningful coincidence between inner state and outer events. When these archetypes unite under the guidance of the self, wealth ceases to be accidental. It becomes inevitable, not through luck or talent, but through depth, integrity, and alignment. Part 3. Transcending the ego. The psychological shift from scarcity to abundance. Carl Jung believed that most human suffering, including financial struggle, originates from the tyranny of the ego, that limited, fearful, self-centered aspect of consciousness that clings to control. When applied to wealth, this means that our scarcity, our exhaustion, and our sense of limitation are not caused by external lack, but by an internal identification with an incomplete version of ourselves. To get rich without luck, talent, or a trust fund, one must undergo an inner transformation, a psychological shift from ego-driven ambition to soul-driven creation. 1. The ego's illusion of control. The ego operates from separation. It perceives life as a competition, a zero-sum game of winners and losers. In the ego's eyes, wealth is something to be taken, secured, or defended. This perspective creates tension and anxiety because it's rooted in fear. Fear of not having enough, fear of losing status, fear of being unseen. Jung argued that the ego's obsession with control is what disconnects us from the flow of life, from what he called the self, the totality of the psyche that includes both conscious and unconscious aspects. When the ego believes it must do everything alone, it shuts off intuition, synchronicity, and creativity, the very forces that generate abundance. From a psychological standpoint, people stuck in this mindset chase opportunities that exhaust them, attach their worth to outcomes, and interpret setbacks as personal failure. Their relationship with wealth becomes transactional rather than creative. The ego doesn't want to build value, it wants to prove value. And this distinction is the root of chronic scarcity. 2. Scarcity as a state of consciousness. Scarcity is not just an external condition, it's an internal vibration. Jung would describe it as a psychic pattern lodged in the collective unconscious inherited through generations that equated survival with moral virtue. Many cultures glorify struggle and distrust, ease embedding guilt into the experience of success. The ego internalizes this conditioning early on. It forms an identity around deprivation. I must struggle to deserve. This archetype, the martyr, thrives on self-sacrifice and exhaustion. It believes that worth is earned through suffering. The result is a deep unconscious attachment to difficulty. Even when opportunities arise, the psyche finds ways to complicate them because struggle feels familiar and familiarity feels safe. Breaking free from this pattern requires awareness. Jung taught that when a person becomes conscious of a complex, it loses its power. Recognizing scarcity as a psychological construct, not an objective truth, dissolves its hold. Scarcity is maintained by belief, and belief is sustained by emotion. When emotion changes, energy shifts, and the external world mirrors that new state. In practice, this shift might begin when a person stops saying, "I can't afford it," and starts asking, "How can I create it?" The question alone signals a move from victimhood to authorship, from ego to self. 3. The shadow of greed and fear of power. The path from scarcity to abundance demands confrontation with two shadows, greed and fear of power. Jung observed that whenever a quality is repressed, it doesn't disappear, it becomes distorted. Those who deny their desire for wealth may unconsciously crave control or validation. Those who deny their ambition may envy others who succeed. The shadow of greed arises when the ego identifies wealth with domination. It hoards because it fears annihilation. The shadow of powerlessness, on the other hand, appears in those who reject ambition altogether. They spiritualize their lack, convincing themselves that wanting more is unholy. Both are symptoms of imbalance. Jung would argue that integration, not denial, is the solution. To transcend greed, you must face it. To overcome fear of power, you must own it. The individual who accepts their desire without shame reclaims psychic energy that was once trapped in repression. That energy, once liberated, becomes creative fuel. The unconscious, when acknowledged, stops sabotaging. Until then, it acts out through self-destructive financial behaviors, impulsive spending, chronic debt, or cycles of feast and famine. These are not random habits, but symbolic expressions of unintegrated power dynamics within the psyche. 4. From ego-driven ambition to soul-driven purpose, Jung differentiated between the ego's goal and the self's calling. The ego seeks possession, status, validation, numbers. The self seeks expression, meaning, impact, creation. While the ego demands recognition, the self desires contribution. When a person's motivation is rooted in ego, success becomes exhausting. It requires constant external proof. But when one acts from the self, success becomes inevitable. It flows not because of entitlement, but because the inner and outer worlds are aligned. Jung described this alignment as individuation, the process by which the personality becomes whole, authentic, and self-directed. In this stage, money is no longer the goal but the mirror. It reflects how effectively you are channeling your true nature. If your work drains you, it's because it doesn't match your self's pattern of energy. If it energizes you, wealth follows naturally. The difference between ambition and purpose is frequency. Ambition grasps, purpose radiates. The former competes, the latter collaborates. Ambition contracts the psyche around scarcity, I must take to survive. Purpose expands it toward abundance, I create because I am. 5. The psychological death of the old self. Every major transformation requires a symbolic death. Jung called this psychological death the dissolution of an outdated identity to make space for a higher order of being. The ego resists this process fiercely because it equates death with annihilation. In truth, it is rebirth. The journey from scarcity to abundance mirrors the hero's journey archetype 1. Departure, realizing that the old ways of thinking about money no longer serve. 2. Descent, facing internal fears, failures, and attachments. 3. Rebirth, emerging with new awareness and purpose. In Jungian terms, this transition represents the movement from the ego-identified self to the self-realized individual. The ego must surrender, control, accept uncertainty, and allow intuition to guide the way. This is why many breakthroughs occur after breakdowns. The collapse of the old identity frees the psyche from false security, creating room for creative insight. When people say they suddenly got lucky or everything fell into place, Jung would interpret it as synchronicity, a meaningful alignment between inner transformation and external reality. Luck is simply the universe reflecting your internal shift in consciousness. 6. Money as mirror of consciousness. Money reveals who we are more than it defines who we are. Jung might call it a projection surface, a psychological mirror for our unconscious attitudes toward value exchange and self-worth. For instance, if you hoard money, you likely fear loss or abandonment. If you spend impulsively, you may be seeking emotional release or love. If you avoid thinking about money, you may associate it with shame. If you chase it obsessively, you may equate it with safety or identity. Each behavior tells a story about our inner world. Jung's approach would not moralize these patterns but interpret them symbolically. Money is not good or evil. It's energy shaped by meaning. The goal is not to change the symbol but to change the relationship to it. When you heal the underlying emotion, fear, guilt, or shame, your outer financial situation reorganizes itself naturally. Abundance follows self-knowledge because the psyche stops wasting energy defending illusions. You begin to attract opportunities that match your integrated vibration rather than your unconscious fears. 7. The role of synchronicity in prosperity. Jung's concept of synchronicity, meaningful coincidence, is central to understanding the psychology of abundance. When the conscious and unconscious align, external reality mirrors inner intention through what appears to be luck. Opportunities, people, and resources emerge at precisely the right time without force. This phenomenon challenges the ego's notion of control. The ego believes success must be planned and earned linearly. The self operates non-linearly. It weaves reality through meaning and alignment. A person attuned to their inner guidance often experiences right place, right time events. These are not random. They are manifestations of psychic coherence. Synchronicity bridges spirituality and psychology. It shows that the universe responds to inner state, not external effort alone. This doesn't mean abandoning action. It means acting from resonance rather than desperation. When you feel compelled from within rather than pressured from without, every step amplifies your energy rather than depleting it. 8. Transcending comparison and envy. The ego thrives on comparison. It measures worth by relativity, richer than poorer, than better than less than. Jung warned that this creates chronic dissatisfaction, a psychic loop that feeds scarcity. Every comparison reinforces separation, while true abundance arises from connection. From a depth psychological view, envy is projection. When you envy someone's wealth, you are witnessing an unclaimed part of your own potential. The psyche projects its unlived energy onto others. The goal is not to suppress envy, but to interpret it symbolically. What within me wants to express this same power or creativity? By reclaiming the projection, energy returns to the self. Instead of competing, you begin to collaborate with the qualities you once admired in others. You stop chasing other people's paths and start walking your own. That's when the universe begins to respond uniquely to you because you are no longer imitating anyone else's frequency. 9. The abundance mindset as a Jungian state of integration. Abundance is not a mindset in the popular self-help sense, it is a state of integration. It occurs when the conscious and unconscious agree that life is trustworthy. This trust allows energy to flow without resistance. Jung's individuation process, the lifelong journey of becoming whole, naturally leads to abundance because it dissolves inner conflict. In this state, money and opportunity are not chased but magnetized. You move from anxiety to alignment. You stop asking, "How do I get?" and start asking, "How can I serve?" This shift signals to the psyche that there is enough, that creation is safe, giving is safe, and receiving is safe. Psychologically, abundance is the absence of fear. It's a nervous system that feels secure even in uncertainty. From that grounded space, decisions become clearer, relationships healthier, and actions more inspired. The external result, wealth, is merely the shadow cast by internal wholeness. 10. Living from the self. When the ego serves the self rather than ruling it, life becomes symphonic. Jung described this as the moment when inner opposites reconcile, light and shadow, masculine and feminine, material and spiritual. The individual stops fragmenting their energy through conflict and begins to act as a unified being. From this unity emerges effortless prosperity. You no longer need to prove, chase, or justify your existence. Itself becomes valuable. This is what Jung meant by living from the self, to embody authenticity so deeply that the world mirrors it back as support, opportunity, and abundance. Wealth, then, is not an accumulation, but an expression, the natural result of consciousness unfolding through form. And once you operate from this level, luck becomes irrelevant, talent becomes secondary, and inheritance becomes unnecessary. The source of abundance is already within, waiting only for recognition. Part 4. The individuated path to wealth-building conscious prosperity. Carl Jung's philosophy teaches that true success and fulfillment do not come from chasing external outcomes, but from aligning the inner psyche with its natural purpose, a process he called individuation. This is the path of becoming whole, integrating one's shadow, embracing the unconscious, and allowing the self, the deeper organizing principle of the psyche, to guide life's expression. When applied to wealth, individuation transforms money from an object of desire into a manifestation of inner harmony. It turns prosperity into a spiritual practice rather than a competition. To get rich without luck, talent, or a trust fund, one must understand wealth not as accumulation but as a byproduct of psychological wholeness. 1. Individuation. The core of conscious prosperity. Individuation is the process by which the conscious ego integrates the unconscious and achieves psychological balance. It's not about perfection or moral purity, but about alignment, living in harmony with the deepest truth of one's being. In Jung's terms, most people live in a state of fragmentation. One part of them seeks abundance while another part fears it. One part dreams of freedom while another clings to safety. This internal conflict wastes enormous psychic energy. Instead of being directed toward creation, that energy feeds anxiety and self-sabotage. The individuated person, by contrast, is unified. Their conscious desires and unconscious motivations move in the same direction. They no longer chase external success for validation. They express internal abundance that inevitably attracts external prosperity. Wealth becomes an organic outcome of inner coherence. The key principle of individuation is self-knowledge. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Once a person recognizes their unconscious patterns, their fears around money, guilt around success, or ancestral loyalty to struggle, those patterns lose power. Awareness dissolves the illusion of fate. 2. The alchemy of value creation. In Jungian, alchemy transformation occurs when base matter is turned into gold, not literal gold but symbolic gold, the awakening of consciousness. Similarly, material wealth arises when inner value becomes externalized through action and service. When you individuate, you begin to understand that you are the gold. The external world only mirrors the level of value you recognize within yourself. Those who doubt their worth unconsciously repel prosperity, while those who honor their inner gold naturally attract opportunities to share it. This is the psychological law of equivalence. The energy you invest in inner work multiplies outwardly. The more self-aware you become, the more you perceive possibilities that others overlook. Jung would call this expanding the field of consciousness. It allows you to see connections, synergies, and creative openings that were invisible when your psyche was clouded by fear. The true path to wealth, therefore, is alchemical. You are not trying to manipulate external events. You are transforming internal lead insecurity, doubt, envy into psychological gold confidence, intuition, and creative flow. 3. Healing the wound of worthiness. At the root of financial struggle lies a deep existential wound, the belief that I am not enough. Jung believed that this wound forms early as the child internalizes conditional love. I'm valued only when I perform, please, or achieve. Over time, the psyche constructs an identity around inadequacy. This belief doesn't just shape relationships, it governs one's relationship with money. People who feel unworthy often undercharge for their work, overgive their energy, or fear receiving abundance because it contradicts their inner narrative. They unconsciously push wealth away to remain loyal to the image of themselves they were taught to believe in. Healing this requires what Jung called shadow integration, acknowledging and reclaiming the disowned aspects of self. You must meet the part of you that feels small, greedy, or ashamed, and bring it into compassion. The moment you can hold those feelings without judgment, they lose their grip. Psychologically, worthiness is not earned through success, it is realized through self-acceptance. Once a person feels inherently valuable, their outer life begins to mirror that truth. They stop chasing and start allowing, and that is when wealth begins to flow naturally without luck or privilege. 4. The role of purpose in prosperity. For Jung, the self always seeks expression through meaningful work. Every individual has a telos, an innate direction or purpose, inscribed within the psyche. Prosperity arises when that purpose is lived consciously. People often confuse purpose with profession, but Jung viewed it as something deeper, an inner pattern of energy that wants to manifest through your life. Whether through teaching, healing, building, or innovating, the self demands participation in creation. When a person resists this calling, choosing safety or imitation over authenticity, psychic energy stagnates. Depression, anxiety, or restlessness often appear as symptoms of unrealized potential. But when you follow your true path, the psyche rewards you with vitality, clarity, and synchronicity. These are signs that energy is flowing in alignment with purpose. From a financial perspective, this alignment creates magnetism. You no longer struggle to convince or compete because your work carries the energetic imprint of authenticity. The market in turn responds to that vibration. Jung might call this the compensation principle, the idea that life rewards equilibrium. When inner and outer purpose match, abundance compensates naturally. 5. Money as psychic energy. In Jung's framework, everything emotion, thought, matter is energy. Money, too, is psychic energy given physical form. It represents movement, exchange, and relationship. The way we handle money reveals how we handle energy itself. If we fear money, we fear energy. If we hoard it, we resist flow. If we spend unconsciously, we discharge energy without awareness. But when we use money intentionally to create, to serve, to express values, we enter a higher level of energetic mastery. To Jung, conscious prosperity means being in relationship with money as a living symbol. It's not about worship or avoidance, but dialogue. Ask yourself, What emotion does money evoke in me? Fear, excitement, shame, power. These emotions are entry points into deeper self-understanding. For example, someone who constantly worries about losing money is projecting their insecurity about losing control. Someone who overspends may be compensating for emotional emptiness. Recognizing these projections allows you to reclaim the psychic energy trapped in them. When that happens, financial balance naturally follows because you've restored inner balance. 6. The integration of masculine and feminine energies. Jung described the psyche as composed of both masculine animus and feminine anima principles. The masculine embodies structure, focus, and action. The feminine represents intuition, flow, and receptivity. To build conscious prosperity, these energies must unite. The masculine plans, but the feminine allows. The masculine executes. The feminine attracts. When they're in conflict, one either hustles without rest or dreams without action. True wealth emerges when you can both act decisively and trust life's timing. In modern society, the imbalance is obvious: overactivity without alignment. Many pursue financial goals aggressively, yet ignore intuition, rest, and reflection. This creates burnout and excess of masculine energy cut off from feminine wisdom. Jung would interpret burnout as a call from the unconscious to restore balance. To embody wealth holistically, cultivate both sides: the discipline to execute warrior energy and the openness to receive sage and creator energy. This inner marriage, what Jung called the conjunctio oppositorum, creates psychological wholeness, and wholeness is the foundation of sustainable success. 7. The ethics of conscious wealth. Jung believed that individuation naturally leads to ethical behavior because it expands awareness beyond egoic self-interest. A person who lives from the self recognizes their interconnectedness with all life. Wealth then becomes stewardship, a responsibility to serve collective evolution, not just personal comfort. Conscious prosperity rejects both greed and guilt. It acknowledges that material abundance can amplify good when guided by wisdom. Jung saw moral development as an outgrowth of consciousness. The more aware one becomes, the less likely one is to exploit others for gain. This is why wealth built on manipulation, deceit, or dominance rarely endures. The unconscious seeks balance through loss, scandal, or emptiness. The individuated person understands that integrity is not moral restraint, but energetic alignment. Dishonesty splits the psyche, truth unifies it. When your wealth aligns with your values, it sustains itself. 8. The inner architecture of lasting prosperity. External stability requires internal structure. Jung viewed the psyche as an inner architecture that must be strong enough to hold energy. When this structure is weak, when boundaries, discipline, or purpose are lacking, prosperity cannot remain stable. Imagine pouring water into a cracked vessel. No matter how much flows in, it leaks. Likewise, those who acquire wealth without psychological maturity often lose it because the ego cannot contain the energy wealth brings. Money amplifies everything: clarity or chaos, generosity or greed. The individuated psyche, however, can contain prosperity because it has roots. Its sense of worth and identity doesn't depend on possessions. Jung emphasized the importance of grounding the spiritual in the material, turning insight into embodiment. Conscious prosperity means being both visionary and responsible, knowing how to dream and how to manage. In practice, this might look like budgeting as an act of mindfulness, investing as an act of faith, and spending as an act of alignment. Each decision becomes a ritual of consciousness, not compulsion. 9. Synchronicity and the flow of divine order. Once the psyche becomes aligned, external events begin to synchronize in ways that seem miraculous. Jung called this phenomenon synchronicity, the meaningful coincidence between inner and outer worlds. In the individuated state, you no longer need to force outcomes. Opportunities arrive in resonance with your vibration. The right connections appear, timing unfolds seamlessly, and resources flow as if by design. The ego calls this luck, but Jung would say it's the self-orchestrating wholeness. Synchronicity does not eliminate effort, it makes effort meaningful. You still act, but your actions are guided by intuition rather than anxiety. You work with life, not against it. This partnership between consciousness and the unconscious is what turns ordinary work into art and ordinary earnings into wealth. The universe becomes a collaborator rather than an obstacle. And the more consciously you engage in this dialogue, the more abundance you experience, not because you control it, but because you trust it. 10. Prosperity as a spiritual practice. To Jung, individuation was not a psychological luxury, but a spiritual necessity. Wealth, when pursued consciously, becomes a sacred path toward that individuation. It teaches responsibility, humility, and trust. Each financial challenge becomes a mirror reflecting your next level of growth. Debt may reveal avoidance, greed may expose emptiness, windfall may test integrity. In this way, money becomes a teacher, a tool for awakening. Living with conscious prosperity means approaching every transaction as a dialogue between your ego and yourself. Am I acting from fear or trust, from scarcity or generosity, from conformity or authenticity? These questions turn material life into spiritual practice. As Jung wrote, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. When you do, prosperity follows as a natural expression of that truth. You no longer need luck, talent, or inheritance. You become the source. The individuated path to wealth is not about becoming more. It's about remembering what you already are, a creative force, capable of shaping reality through consciousness. Once that truth is embodied, abundance is no longer pursued, it is lived. Wealth isn't luck, it's alignment. It begins when you stop chasing outcomes and start transforming from within. Jung taught that when the unconscious becomes conscious, destiny changes shape. If this message spoke to you, share it, because someone else out there is still trapped in the illusion of scarcity. Remember, becoming rich is not about what you get, but about what you awaken.